All right. Hey, good morning, guys. This is Justin Spears here with you today. Some of you hearing my voice may know me from my podcast, The Other Side. I'm doing this video today on my normal page. This isn't something that I wanted to necessarily link to The Other Side. I thought about making it kind of a bonus episode or something along those lines, but it really just didn't fit a whole lot. This is more of just kind of a personal narrative on my part, so I wanted to keep this kind of separate from that. But I did last night put out a feeler on my Facebook page that I would be doing this kind of cut promo episode today on the deep state. If you listen to my show, The Other Side, which you can find at TOS Podcast on Facebook, we've got our YouTube account where you can catch our archive shows. That's The Other Side with Margison and Spears. You can catch all of our shows over there. Encourage you to take a look at that. If you've not listened to that before, go ahead and give it a listen. One of the things that I focused on in my last episode that I did was on Trump's Helsinki summit. And one of the things that has really emerged out of that, there's not been a lot of talk about the substance as much, I don't think, as about what was said, more as it's turned into this, hey, whose side is this guy on, meaning President Trump? Certainly there was a feeling from many that what he did in, I guess, in some ways coming across as, believing and backing President Putin was turning his back on America, right? And that he basically said, his intelligence community, he wasn't going to believe them over Vladimir Putin. This guy is a dictator. He's a brutal tyrant, saying that he had no reason to not believe that President Putin and the Russians weren't involved in doing anything to mess with the 2016 elections. So this then kind of moved the narrative further along the road here, where people started to, pit the intelligence community against Russia. And this has raised a lot of questions, one of which I've seen kind of floating around in social media conversations that I've been a part of and that I've observed. And that is just a lack of understanding about who we are. What is America when people talk about America? And there's a conflation here that America is Washington, D.C. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this in the setup here, because I did a whole episode on this, again, that you can catch in our archives just this past week. But we need to think a little bit more about what that term means. And I could do an entire episode on that alone, but certainly don't have the time. And that's not really the intent of what I want to get across here. But I think it is an important thing to understand what I'm going to be telling you here today and trying to show you where we are as a country today. We are not Washington, D.C. We, the United States, is not the physical, tangible government. That is just those are just physical buildings that have been built with people in them, right? I mean, we talk about we the people. There are people. Now, those people that populate those buildings are much different from the rest of the population that exists in this country. That key right there is very important to understanding who we are. And then we could break that down even further, right, to talk about decentralization. Mark Kreslin's had a fantastic piece on a step-by-step why decentralization is so important, what we can do to kind of help promote that. Highly encourage you to check him out. Mark Kreslin's on Facebook. You can find that post. He's posted that within the last week or so. You can scroll down through his page and find that. Because again, I might actually share that out today. But we have to understand, right, that when we talk about the United States, we got to talk about the people, okay, first and foremost, and not attach ourselves to thinking about patriotism being allegiance to the suits that populate the Capitol building, or the politicians that populate the halls of the White House, or the robed judges inside the Supreme Court. That physical allegiance is oftentimes what leads to this nationalism that is so dangerous. And so what I want to transition into then is talking about on an even deeper level, no pun intended here, we're going to talk about the deep state, the people inside Washington, D.C. that are really the decision makers, the people that are really pulling the strings in terms of money allocation, in terms of decision making. And that is the term that gets used, the deep state. There's been many people that have coined that phrase and used it over, more importantly, over the last probably 10 years or so. But it's come to prominence here, specifically with President Trump, because one of the things that he kind of ran on when he talked about draining the swamp was another way of saying, like, we need to get at this deep state. So who is the deep state? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit in this video today. And we're going to kind of break down some of the evolution, the history behind it. And so in order to do that, what I want to start with, and I think this is a fantastic resource. I encourage anybody, if you've not ever heard this before, some of you out there may have heard this before, but if you've not ever heard this, highly encourage you to go and watch the entirety of this video from former President Eisenhower. And again, some of you are probably familiar with this. On January 17th, 1961, President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his farewell address. And in that, he famously talked about the establishment of what he called the military-industrial complex. Now, before I even go any further with this, I want to make one thing very clear. With what I'm about to talk about and try to deconstruct and tear down and really be very critical of, I am not in any way, shape, or form being critical of the men and women of our armed forces. In fact, I'm trying to make the claim that those individuals who have made a decision to serve this country, while very noble, some have done it for obviously the reasons to serve and honor and defend what has been established in this country. Obviously, some have maybe been persuaded more from a monetary perspective. Hey, I can get some college paid for. I can go work on and develop a craft, a skill. Not to say that they don't have any more or less passion for defending the country, but maybe there were more other overriding reasons for why they would enlist. Obviously, I've got many family members and friends that are active and former military. So again, I want to be very clear. I am not in any way, shape, or form critiquing or criticizing what they do for us. Instead, what I would like to do is kind of point out that we need those people here at home. We need those people within our country using their time and talent and skills to develop friends and family, to use their talents in the public sector and private sector. We need those people here helping out within the borders of this country, because what I'll kind of wrap up and summarize with, what we need is to build within. And I've advocated for, if those of you that know me have heard me say before, of completely eradicating all foreign intervention, and that would include tearing down military bases in other parts of the world and bringing all those men and women home. Yes, I understand that would create an issue. You got a flood of people now into the workforce and into society, but I think we could handle that. And if we were to build up more from within, I think it's something we could do. So at any rate, what I'm going to do is I fast forwarded here a little bit on Eisenhower's speech. The total speech is a little over 16 minutes. I've gone to about the 7-minute mark. I'm going to kind of play this in bits and pieces and kind of stop and comment on some things. But as I'm doing that, what I'd really like for you to listen to is listen to the tone that Eisenhower is using. Now, again, with trying to keep this within a certain time constraint, if I had more time, I'd go back and talk about the background of, obviously, those of you that aren't familiar with Eisenhower, who he was. Obviously, World War II hero, served 8 years as president of this country. So I say that because you would think this is a guy, right, that served in the Great War. Listen to his tone here. Listen to his warnings, listen to what he's saying back in 1961. And I've pulled some statistics to kind of bring it up to speed a little bit as to where he was in 1961 versus where we are today in 2018. So he's getting ready to kind of talk about, in this part of his speech, this warning about putting so much emphasis and money and people and everything into the defense world. So listen to what he has to say.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment.
Now, hold on first right there. Notice he says it is a vital role in keeping the peace, but notice he doesn't say that we need to be actively deployed all across the world, intervening into every other sovereign country's foreign affairs as a part of that. I just want to point that out there.
Arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry.
Let that sink in. We had no armaments industry. 1961, okay? Think about that. Keep that in your mind as we move forward here a little bit.
American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations.
Think about that. 1961. In 2018, the Department of Defense budget comes in at about $638 billion. $638 billion. That's a base budget of 574 and 64.6 billion in overseas contingency operations, with over 3 million workers devoted into this industry. So you can see in a relatively short period of time from our history's perspective, how quickly this has advanced, and listen to what he says about what has helped cause that.
Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications.
And what would that be? Excuse me. What does he mean by the grave implications here? And he talked about the impact that this has economically, spiritually, right? These people who are a part of, excuse me, these people who are a part of this industry, their lives are completely uprooted. I mean, just being gone from home for so long, being deployed, active, having to up and move the roots of their family to other areas, and maybe by choice. I understand that. But this has a major impact on our country, one that I don't think gets looked at nearly enough when we think about the impact that the rise in this military industrial complex, as he'll call it here in just a moment, has led to in this country. I'll let him continue.
Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will...
Boom. Right there. How can you not look at where we are in 2018 today and say that has not been the case? I mean, go through history, ladies and gentlemen. Look at even your beloved President Reagan and all of the intervening that took place in South America and the Middle East. Obviously, the President Bush, the senior, and George H.W. Bush. Look, Clinton. It doesn't matter. It's not a Republican and Democrat issue, right? That's what we talk about when we say the deep state. It's not a two party issue here. As I'll play a clip from Mike Lofgren, who's the author of a book called Anatomy of the Deep State. He'll talk about that a little bit in his interview with Ron Paul, where he says, look, and this is a former Republican, and he says this is not a Republican and Democrat issue. This is a larger, deeper issue of people who want to use the power of that $638 billion from the DoD budget to intervene across the world and just creating upheaval and displacing hundreds of thousands of millions of other people in their own sovereign countries because some polycrat here in the United States deems that there is a threat somewhere. You tell me, where do you see the threat in these third world, Stone Age countries where we are meddling, trying to uproot leaders, put in new leaders, just tearing families and cultures apart? How can you not hear what President Eisenhower said in 1961 and not think of him as an absolute clairvoyant future seer of what was to come based off of what we've built here?
Persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the...
What's he saying here? He's saying that we are sucking the resources out of this country. As I mentioned at the beginning here before I started the video, we need these men and women here at home. We need their skills. We need them as people, building our communities, making our country strong from within, not overseas, meddling in foreign affairs at the behest of, again, some unelected, power-hungry bureaucrat who sees a threat somewhere and uses rhetoric to scare politicians and the public into thinking that, by God, if we're not over there doing something, then our country is going to face imminent disaster. It doesn't work that way, guys. We need those people here. They're being sucked out of their garages and their intellect is being used for other means here. They're being taken out of universities where they can go and get degrees, meaningful degrees, and develop skills and go into trades and help where we need help here at home.
The conduct of research, partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Let me fast forward for you here to 2018. Now, I've never spent one day in active combat. I've never done any formal military training. But think about drone strikes. Excuse me. How easy is it now to push a button remotely, drop military drone strikes, and not have to be face to face? It cheapens an understanding of what it means to destroy, to take a life. Gone are the days of seeing the person in the eye and having to make that decision as to what you're about ready to do. It makes it that much easier. And again, increases death and destruction through technology. And that's, again, something that he's pointing out here. I'm going to play just a couple more minutes of this, and then I want to transition over to a clip from Mike Lofgren that I mentioned earlier on the Ron Paul Liberty Report.
It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society. Another factor in maintaining balance involves the element time. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. During the long lane of the history yet to be written, America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. The last thing that he said there I think is so important, kind of going back to him talking about the vision of what America could be and should be, a proud confederation. He talked about the American people. He said, you and me and the government. Notice the separation there, the decentralization of understanding what this system of government should look like. When we talk about sending elected officials to Washington to represent us, right? Not to represent industries, not to represent lobbying groups, not to represent any type of corporate interest, to represent us. That doesn't happen. I saw a post on Facebook recently. Somebody had taken a picture of the Capitol building and said something along the line, captioned it something along the lines, I love this building. It is the consent of the governed. Really? Really? You consent to what is going on in the halls of Congress today? They have an 8% approval rating. Show me where the consent is in that, right? Show me where I signed the social contract that allows the government officials to do the things that they're doing. I didn't consent to that. And I know a lot of other people would say the same thing. And so again, just to kind of tie up all of this here with what President Eisenhower is warning us about, we need to be on alert. We need to be guarded. We need to, as Mark Kreslin says, unplug the matrix cable from the back of our heads, become free and independent thinkers, look at what's going on, and make a conscious effort and decision to hold our people that we are sending to Washington, D.C. accountable first and foremost, to try to institute change from within. That's only going to come. And there are ways in which we can do that, ladies and gentlemen. It's written into the Constitution. The states can hold a convention to to amend the Constitution. We can certainly put pressure on Congress to bring an amendment to the forefront. If there are constitutional ways in which we can get this done, great, I'm all for that. If there are peaceful ways where we can work together to do that, I'm all for that. I'm not calling for people to go The Walking Dead and take their sticks and brooms and guns and march into D.C. and lead a revolt. I'm not saying we're there. I'm saying change has to occur, though. And I'm saying that you can point your hate at foreign dignitaries and officials and rulers. You can point your hate at people like President Trump. You can point your hate at somebody because they have an R next to their name or a D next to their name, but it's all misguided. It's all misguided. The people that we need to be holding accountable are these unelected bureaucrats that are a part of this intelligence community, military industrial complex, deep state, whatever term you need to use to satisfy your understanding for who the decision makers are and who is allocating all of these tax dollars that you and I work every day so hard for to send our sons and daughters off to fight in endless, needless wars. It's time to put it to a stop. It's time that we wake up and realize that the enemy is within. And this isn't conspiracy thinking, guys. It's not. Why else would so many people in the intelligence community in particular be so outraged over what President Trump did? Because they see that as a threat. They see that as a threat to the days are gone when we could throw our weight around, where we could buy off the politicians, where we could go to, again, it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat, go and control these people and tell them, you're going to vote for this. And we could get in access to the president and we could say, Mr. President, we've got Congress. They're going to allow you to do any military intervention that your heart desires. It didn't change under Obama. He ran on hope and change. What changed in the world of military operations? Nothing. Nothing changed. He operated just like President Bush did. Republican, Democrat, does not matter. Does not matter. We have to hold these people accountable and understand that over 2,000 U.S. soldiers, roughly, according to one study, have died in Operation Enduring Freedom since about 2001. It's 2,000 souls gone from this planet. That doesn't even account for other ally losses. It doesn't obviously account for the hundreds of thousands that have died in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, because we think that there is this threat through weapons of mass destruction or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, right? Beyond some things like San Bernardino, which I don't even know that you could call that. I mean, I know the word terrorism gets thrown around. Other than 9/11, which obviously a horrific event, right? Not attacked by a country, attacked by an ideology. Okay, that ideology of hate has arisen. Why? Because of U.S. intervention in the Middle East. Take time to actively think about this. Take time to actively think about what this world might look like if we were out of all of those sovereign countries. Now, I know we could get into a debate about isolation versus interventionism and what did it look like in World War I before we got involved, World War II, before I get all that. Okay, at some point, the threat does arise to a level where it is clear and evident beyond a reasonable doubt that we do need to defend ourselves. And if you even want to go a step further, say defend our allies, I might be able to buy into that a little bit. But you tell me where the imminent threat is. Where has Syria posed a major threat to invading the United States? Where has Afghanistan posed, as a country, a sovereign nation, have they posed a threat to invading the United States? Why do we still need military bases in Germany, in Japan, you pick a country, throw a dart at a map. Why do we need a military base there? We need to focus on what's going on here in America. So I want to wrap up here with a clip from, as I mentioned a couple of times, Mike Lofgren, who's the author of Anatomy of the Deep State. This was a book that he wrote back in, I believe, 2016. Former Republican. I believe he was an aide in Congress and then ran for Congress. I don't know that he was elected, but he, in the beginning of this interview with Dr. Paul, he talks a little bit about some of his background and the impetus for writing. But this was written, I'm guessing, just before the election, because he talks about Trump here. And again, I want to go back and kind of circle as we wrap up here of what Trump was talking about with Drain the Swamp, and why he has so many enemies, both Republican and Democrat, that are throwing arrows at him. Listen to what he has to say here about this as Dr. Paul asks him this question.
Now, I want to ask a question more in general of the consequence of allowing the deep state to exist. Because right now it looks like it's pretty powerful in their control, and the political parties mean nothing, and you pointed that out, and there's so much control. But it seems to me like there are quite a few different elements involved here. One, you mentioned the Constitution and how they act outside the Constitution. So the issue of liberty is there. The issue of finance is there. Money keeps getting spent and it's going to special interests, and the country's getting poorer. We end up going to war in an unconstitutional fashion. Now, I'm looking for the wake-up call for the American people. And do you think there can be a wake-up call where they'll finally wake up and say, you know, we can't do it because the current system can't continue? I don't believe it can continue for a lot of reasons. One will be the finances, and other things that people get disgusted. Do you sort of anticipate that there will be a wake-up call? Or do you think we're at the early stages of that, where the people are going to speak out and say enough is enough, and we need to change things?
Well, 6 months ago, as I was finishing up this book, I would not have anticipated some of the events we've seen now. What I'm about to say does not constitute either an endorsement or a critique of the policies of the people involved. But I will say, on the one hand, you've got Donald Trump and you've got Bernie Sanders, and their business models for campaigning, for raising money, the themes they operate off are scaring the daylights out of the party oligarchs. Because on one hand, you have Donald Trump, in his own extremely modest estimation, richer than God, saying he doesn't need money from oligarchs. And that appeals to a certain portion of the voters. These are people who maybe cannot connect the dots. They don't really have much knowledge of what's going on because commercial media make sure they don't know about it. They make sure they know about Kim Kardashian, but they know something's going wrong in the country. And Trump's extremely blunt appeal kind of appeals to them. Sanders, on the other hand, is railing against the oligarchy of Wall Street, and he's got like 1 million plus contributors, and it's small amounts of money, less than $30. He's breaking the sort of Hillary mold where you declare your candidacy, then you go to Goldman Sachs and hold a fundraiser, then you jet out to the West Coast and have a fundraiser in David Geffen's mansion with all the glitterati. We're seeing something different now.
Right. Mike, we're going to have to close short.
All right. So again, what is he saying there? He's saying that all three of those politicians, and obviously we know Trump ends up winning, and again, to circle back to why the deep-rooted hatred that we see coming from the deep state, the establishment on both sides. Obviously, most Democrats are going to be in favor of big government, using the government for things. Republicans, 98% of them fall in the same category. I saw a meme the other day that said Republicans campaign as libertarians and govern as Democrats, which is so true. So again, going back, it doesn't matter if there's an R or a D next to the name. There are a lot of arrows being lobbed at President Trump because he didn't need to attach to the barnacles. He didn't need to attach to the machine, and because of that, they don't have him in the palm of their hand like they had all the other presidents that were attached to the establishment of the parties that needed the money that needed the influence to be able to enact what they wanted to do. And so I think when we take a look at what President Trump is doing and why he's getting so much hatred spewed his way, we see that there is a real threat to this modus operandi out of Washington, D.C. Just listen to this report that was done where an interview was conducted by people on both sides of the aisle, again, showing that this isn't a party issue, and talking about, oh, this deep state thing, this is conspiracy thinking, that term is derogatory. It undermines the work that we do to keep America safe. Just unreal to the lengths that people will go to try to justify what this has done. It says, but to many with years in the government, the term deep state is disturbing. Deep state is both inaccurate and grossly misleading, said Nancy McEldowney, who retired in June as director of the Arlington, Virginia-based Foreign Services Institute. The term originated in the context of analyzing the situations in Turkey and Egypt, where I served, usually to talk about propaganda, dirty tricks, and even violence to overthrow the government. To refer to career civil servants in the U.S. government as some form of deep state is a clear attempt to delegitimize voices of disagreement. Even worse, it carries with it the potential for fear baiting and rumor mongering, and is really a dark conspiratorial term that does not correspond to reality. Chris Liu, President Obama's deputy labor secretary, rejects the notion that some entrenched deep state is undermining Trump's political appointees. The politics set the direction of the agency, but they can only do it effectively if they tap into expertise of the federal civil services, which is completely inane. He goes on to talk a little bit more here, and I'll start to wrap this up. Liu, now a senior fellow at the University of Virginia Miller Center for Public Affairs, says it's important to remember why the civil service was created under the 1883 Pendleton Act. Before then, there were stories of the amounts of time President Lincoln spent meeting with job seekers, with ads in Washington, D.C. newspapers selling jobs under the spoils system, and the tradition of incoming administrators kicking everyone out. A lot of that had to do with President Lincoln needing to secure votes for ratification of the 13th and 14th Amendments that we've talked a little bit about before. But again, what all this, guys, basically boils down to is this. It says, but if the Trump team is misreading how government works, it is not the first new administration to do so. Every new president brings into office political appointees who are weary of bureaucrats, said Paulette Goddard, professor of public service at New York University. Democrats historically have been as reluctant to work with careerists as Republicans, not because of the ideology, but because of the desire for speed. That is what I want to wrap up with. Why is this so dangerous? Why is, at the end of the day, if you take everything that I've talked about here today and you go, okay, so what, Spears, what's the big deal here? I'm not quite sure that I believe this whole notion of a deep state or this kind of bureaucratic power that's running cabal that's running DC. I would first off encourage you to read more into it. Don't just take my word for it. Go out, do some Google searches. Obviously, there's a number of different books out there that exist on this topic. Read, get knowledgeable on it, and come to understand it. But the thing that I would point out that is kind of the application takeaway from this that you need to understand is this. Whether or not you are full in on the deep state or not, there is a system within Washington, D.C. that is very powerful, that has our elected officials in the palm of their hands and is using that power to bypass legal means for how this government should work, because they need speed. They need to be able to move quickly. They need to be able to act in a forceful manner, in a very rapid way. Our Constitution does not allow our government to be able to do that. Right? Even President Obama talked about that at one point, where he said, I would love to do all of these things, but I've got this thing called the Constitution. And that thing called the Constitution is set up to keep people like Obama and Trump, quite honestly, and it was supposed to work with the Bushes and Clintons and things like that as well, from being able to run roughshod, being able to just boom, move at breakneck speed into whatever heedless war they want to plunder us off into. and not take the time to debate it, not take the time to go and look at the merits of what is really going to happen as a result of moving into this direction. That is what the most dangerous part of this centralized power in DC is all about. It's undermining the way in which our government works. It starts by taking the tax dollars, deciding who is going to get them in a most ridiculous manner, spending way over what our budgets are. From there, they take our people and they push them off into military interventions, not wars, because then they know if they do that, they have to get a declaration of war from Congress, right? Not saying that they wouldn't authorize it. But if they can do this military intervention or whatever the president calls it now, there's more latitude there with being able to send resources off without congressional approval. But that still doesn't mean that there isn't any money being spent here. So that happens as well. So you've got all of this that's adding up. And in the meantime, as former President Eisenhower talked about, it's draining our resources. It's taking our men and women away from us physically, spiritually, economically. It is wrecking our country from within. Again, I ask you to think about, what would this country look like if you have somebody who is actively serving, maybe just got home from a deployment? Think about what your life and their life would look like had they been home during that period of time, had they been contributing to their community, had they been able to serve in their community, had they been able to fill a job in the community. How much different this country would look. And we wouldn't be any less safe, ladies and gentlemen. Don't buy into the fear. Don't buy into the warmongering. Don't buy into, if we're not involved in every corner of the globe, we face catastrophic results. It's not going to happen. It is the wool being pulled over your eyes and you being led to the ballot box every 2 to 4 years to say, I'm going to continue to vote for the same thing and hope that change comes along. But guess what, guys? It won't come along. So I'm going to wrap that up here for today. I appreciate you taking time to listen to this. Again, if you have any comments on this, please feel free. Leave them in the comments section of the video. I'll be checking that out. Feel free to share this out as well if you've got friends or family that you think would enjoy hearing this message. I really encourage you to do that as well. And please feel free to engage us in any way. I would love to be able to continue this conversation as we move forward. Also, don't forget, check out our weekly podcast, The Other Side, that I host with a coworker, Mr. Mike Margison. We talk about government economics from a different perspective, the side that you don't get in traditional education and the mainstream media. We are a part of the Cerberus Radio Network as well, so you can catch all the great programming that goes on over there on Cerberus Radio Network on Facebook. You go facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. You can find our shows along with Suzanne Sherman, Mark Kreslins, Dan Bailey, Jeff Johnson. We've got Mike Meharry, the 10th Amendment Center, his podcast. We've got the Peter Schiff Gold Report that plays there as well. So lots of great things going on there. Again, thank you for listening today. I am out.